Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
I had friends, Bishop Barron. I had friends who were sent out of their classrooms because they dared to challenge the religious orthodoxy in which we were being raised. And you want to sit there smugly and tell me that materialism is gross? You want to sit there smugly and suggest that there's no conflict between science and religion? Well, tell that to Catholic Ireland, Bishop Barron.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to take a moment to make you aware of my Patreon, the link for which can be found in the description below. Sign up today for as little as £3 per month and you can gain access to a plethora of perks and extras, including downloadable audio-only and ad-free versions of my podcast that you can listen to on the go. You can also have your question answered in a monthly video, and better still, depending on which tier you choose, you could even sit down for a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. All that is available and much, much more. All you got to do is click the link in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you are all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So, is there a conflict between science and religion? Religion's most passionate adherents differ on this question. Some fundamentalists will just reject science and say, no, in the case of Christianity, for example, the Bible has the correct answer. The Bible is essentially a science textbook that contains all of the answers that one could ever possibly be looking for. Others, like the person I'm going to discuss in today's video, claim that despite their commitment to their faith, that there is absolutely no contradiction between that faith and the endeavors of science. Well, I'm here to argue against that position, and to do that, I'm going to delve into the comments of one Bishop Barron. Bishop Barron, guys, is an incredibly influential thinker in this kind of religious apologetics domain. Apologetics, if you're not familiar, is the domain of religious discourse that's charged with defending the faith against its critics. In this case, the critics who would dare to suggest that there's a conflict between science and religion. And so, yeah, I am one of those critics, and we're going to dive right in here. Just before we do, though, just a little bit of information on Bishop Barron. Bishop Barron is a Catholic, and this is my playground. This is my neck of the woods. I was raised a Catholic. For those of you who have been watching this channel for any length of time, you'll know my autobiographical details, and that I was raised a Catholic, and that I was rather fundamentalist, and that I had some creationist beliefs. I denied evolution and all those kinds of things. Now, that doesn't mean that all Catholics do that. Catholicism is a label, right? I mean, Catholics disagree on things. But I think it's fair to say broadly that Catholicism, at least as it concerns the Catechism of the Catholic Church, is one of the most insane denominations of Christianity. I've come to the conclusion, it's really bizarre for me to say, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the history of Ireland, but there is tension, to put it mildly, between Catholics and Protestants because of the history of British imperialism and the situation in the north of Ireland and so on. I won't go into that in this video because it's beside the point, but I just wanted to give you that context before I say what I'm about to say, because there are Catholics who will turn in their graves as I say the following statement. But if somebody put a gun to my head and said you have to choose to either be a Catholic or a Protestant and live out those beliefs, I'd choose Protestant every time. Why? Because Protestantism is essentially Catholicism light. It is Catholicism without some of the more zany and bombastic commitments. The most obvious example that comes to mind, and it's probably one that you're familiar with, dear listener, is the fact that the Catholic Catechism, now, whether or not Catholics believe this is a separate question. I've met lots of Catholics that don't, but the Catholic Catechism teaches that the transubstantiation is a real thing, so that when a priest or vicar blesses the bread and the wine during a church service, the Catholic Catechism claims that bread and wine literally, not metaphorically, not figuratively, not poetically, it literally transforms into the body and blood of Christ. Now, that is insanity. It is absolute insanity. But the Catholic Church stands by this position. Whereas many Protestant denominations, and again, Protestantism is an umbrella term. There's lots of Protestant denominations. But take Anglicanism, for example, the Church of England in the United Kingdom. They don't believe that the bread and wine turn into the literal body and blood of Christ. They believe that they're just representations, and it's pretty hard to argue with them. In any case, Bishop Barron is a Catholic, right? He is a Catholic, so he's, an adherent of this, in my view, zany or more bombastic, I dare say more irrational denomination of Christianity. And he, in the video that we're about to break down and analyze, claims that there is no contradiction between science and faith, or at least from his perspective more specifically, there's no contradiction between Catholicism and science. Now, as you can probably tell, dear listener, I think this is an absolutely moronic claim. I think this is insanity. I think this is just absolutely ridiculous. But again, a little bit more on Bishop Barron. I've pulled up his YouTube page here, so I said that he's very influential. I wasn't kidding, guys. His YouTube channel has 502,000 subscribers at the time of recording. 502,000. And I can only imagine that number is going to grow. And the video that I'm about to dissect and analyze actually has 148,000 views. So Bishop Barron is a big deal, right? He's a huge figure in the religious apologetics community, right? In the Christian community. There's a lot of people who look to Bishop Barron and view him as an inspirational figure, as a person who kind of stands for a form of rational Christianity. And to be honest, I've seen him in a number of debates. I watched him debate Cosmic Skeptic, for example. I wasn't blown away, unfortunately. I didn't think that his arguments were very persuasive at all. I thought his arguments, if anything, were quite weak. And so for anybody who's still holding on to this idea that Bishop Barron is an amazing and inspirational and rational Christian, I want to, tell you some home truths here. I want to attack that idea, and not just for the sake of it, but because I've been ruminating on this for quite some time. And to be quite honest, I don't even know how he's garnered this reputation. I think his arguments are absolutely ridiculous, flawed, and fallacious. And so without further ado, guys, I'm going to jump into this video titled, Is Science Opposed to Faith? Bishop Barron's Sunday Sermon. I will, of course, link to the video in the description if you want to check it out, and I would encourage you to do so. Credit where credit is due. I think, just to at least conclude in a compliment here, I think Bishop Barron does an amazing job of packaging his ideas. His channel is nothing short of breathtaking. The production values, his articulacy, he's clearly quite an intelligent fellow. Please don't misunderstand, dear listener. When I say that somebody holds ridiculous or silly or stupid ideas, I simply mean to say that on this particular topic, I think that they have a silly perspective. I'm not judging their entire character. You will see as soon as we start dissecting this video that Bishop Barron appears, for all intents and purposes, to be a rather articulate, intelligent, and above all else, I would say kind and decent human being. And so none of what I'm about to do is an ad hominem attack. I'm not attacking his character. I'm not attacking his overall personality or his life or his work or anything of that nature. When I call him an idiot in this particular video, I'm referring to the idiocy of his specific beliefs vis-a-vis his alleged claim that there is no conflict between Catholicism and or faith versus science. I think that's insane. So without further ado, let's dive into the video and let's check it out. Is Bishop Barron right? Is there a conflict between science and religion? Let's find out.
Peace be with you. Friends, probably most of you know that I spend a lot of time trying to reach out to young people who have disaffiliated from the church. So I've been studying this issue for a long time. And in study after study, survey after survey, very often the number one reason young people say they disaffiliate from religion is that religion is in conflict with science.
Sounds like those young people are paying attention. Good for them.
The warfare between religion and science is kind of assumed by a lot of young people who disaffiliate today. And just think of the rhetoric, that you'll pick up all over the culture. People just say Galileo, and right away you think, oh, there's obscurantist, oppressive religion standing in the way of the advance of the sciences.
Isn't that exactly what happened to Bishop Barron? Wasn't Galileo imprisoned, and didn't he serve the rest of his life under house arrest for daring to suggest that the sun is at the center of our solar system? Wasn't it the church that oppressed him? Wasn't it the church that disagreed with him and punished him thusly? This isn't even up for debate.
They'll say, look, 90% of scientists claim to be non-believers, etc.
Yes, that's true. Most scientists do purport to be non-believers, and I can't help but wonder why. Is it perhaps that they have looked into things? Is it perhaps that they have realized that, the Big Bang might perhaps explain where the universe comes from? Oh, but, God caused the Big Bang, right? Well, where's the scientific evidence for that, right? Scientists are guilty of nothing other than being super smart and investigating questions to try and find the right answer. And you know what we find every single time we discover the explanation for something? We discover that there wasn't a God involved. We discover that magic wasn't the explanation. Every single mystery that has plagued humanity throughout history has given way to a scientific explanation. There is no single mystery in the history of the universe that has given way to a religious explanation, and I defy you to name one. You won't be able to. What you'll name is a mystery that has, as of yet, been explained. You'll point to something that continues to be a mystery. For example, the origin of life. Some atheists, I'm ashamed to say, misunderstand the theory of evolution, and they think that it explains where life came from, but no, it doesn't. Evolution explains how life proliferated and changed over time. Where the original self-replicating organisms came from, we're not sure. We don't know how it started. There's some evidence that points in the direction that the chemicals for life can form naturally, sure. But again, we haven't hit the bullseye yet. We don't know how life began. Of course, religious people will just assert God did it. Simple, right? Our job is done. But that's no different to when people allege that thunder and lightning were caused by God's anger. Then we did some science and we figured out that that wasn't the case. Again, a religious explanation or a mystery giving way to a scientific one. So it's not surprising to me that most scientists are not religious.
This idea of the war between religion and science is relatively recent. That's more of a 19th century phenomenon. For the first, roughly 3 centuries of the natural sciences, most of the great figures, Descartes comes to mind, Galileo himself, Gregor Mendel, so many others, Newton, were all devoutly religious people.
Let's take those in order, shall we? And I've written some notes here, guys, so if you see me glancing down, I've got a bunch to say on this topic. So, summarized, Bishop Barron's position here is, these scientists that I've named, these incredibly influential scientific types, these just, giants of science, upon whom the rest of science is based, right? We're standing on the shoulders of these giants every single day when we talk about science. There's no denying that these people were incredibly intelligent. And of course, Bishop Barron's point is, there's no conflict between science and religion when the godfathers or when the fathers of modern science were all religious. But first thing to be aware of here is that we're talking about people who lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And so we knew less then. So they might be giants of science, but the average scientist today knows much, much more than they ever did. A lot of these scientists lived at a time before the theory of evolution was discovered. They lived before we understood what the Big Bang was, or, the origin of the universe, and so on and so forth. And I dare say, and you might be shocked to hear me say this, dear listener, but at a certain point in the past, it might not have been irrational to believe in a God. Rationality is quite distinct from reason, I would say. There's a difference between them. Rationality is when, at least how I'm defining it here, guys, is when somebody uses the evidence that's available to them to form the best possible conclusion, right? So I'll give you an example. If somebody falsifies a crime scene, say, right? If somebody plants my DNA at a crime scene, if somebody doctors some footage, photoshops it to make it look like I'm in the CCTV on my way to that location where the crime has occurred. So you've got my DNA at the scene, you've got doctored footage, and let's imagine the person who has died has had a row with me in the recent past. It's not irrational to come to the conclusion that I'm a key suspect there, even though in this case a further exploration might reveal that the evidence has been falsified. But you're not irrational. Rationality doesn't always get you to the right answer. Rationality is when you just use the available evidence. And I submit to you, dear listener, that if you go back into the past far enough, that it at least becomes more rational to believe in a God, arguably, because the evidence that was available to you at that point, or the lack thereof, you know, the appearance of design in nature is very, very persuasive. The appearance of complexity, you know, this is why I've said, I'm on record saying that the design argument is probably one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of God. The problem is, given today's understanding, we know how the complexity of the human body, and any other animal for that matter, you know, the circulatory system, the eye, we know how those things formed over time because the theory of evolution explains it. We have a very good understanding of that. We now know how simple mechanisms can evolve over time to become more complex, to create something like a bird's wing, or a human eye, or the brain, or what have you. And so it's much less rational to believe that there's a designer today because there's evidence in the opposite direction. Might it have been reasonable to believe that there was a cosmic designer in the past, say 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago? It was certainly more rational because we didn't have a naturalistic explanation for design. Now, look, it's still fallacious. It's still a God of the gaps. We don't have an explanation, so therefore God. I'm just pointing out that it was at least more rational in the past to believe in God. And so these titans of science, people like Descartes and Galileo, of course they were more likely to believe in God given their day. Does this demonstrate that the conflict between science and religion is an imagined one? I don't think so. And unfortunately for Bishop Barron, the examples that he's chosen here really don't work in his favor, at least for most of them. So he mentions Descartes. Descartes' work was banned by the Catholic Church in the 1660s. There is a list of books that the Catholic Church used to update. It was called the Index of Prohibited Books. These were books, as the name suggests, that were banned because they were considered irreligious. They were considered blasphemy. Right? They were considered to be in conflict with religion. Descartes' works were featured on that list. And here Bishop Barron names Descartes as though it's a point in his favor to suggest that there's no conflict between science and religion, when the forefathers of his very faith placed Descartes' works on this index of prohibited books. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me? So I'm sorry, Bishop Barron, but your Cartesian, your Descartes example just doesn't work. You also mentioned Galileo. Now, I've already mentioned this in the video already, but allow me to repeat. So you name Galileo as a man of God, and somehow you allege that this is a point in favor of the idea that there's no conflict between science and religion. But Galileo was sentenced to life in prison. He was sentenced to life in prison for explaining heliocentrism, the idea that the sun is at the center as opposed to the earth. The Catholic Church was so dismayed by this claim that they imprisoned him for life in his home. He served the rest of his life under house arrest for daring to suggest the scientifically true explanation of heliocentrism that the Catholic Church disagreed with. Guys, this is shocking. The Vatican didn't admit Galileo was right until 1992. I'm 30 years of age. I was born in 91. I was born in 1991. Galileo died in 1642. 1642. It took them 359 years to acknowledge that they were incorrect. And Bishop Barron wants to use Galileo as an example of the supposed, compatibility between science and religion. Don't you dare. This is ridiculous. This is patently absurd. And the plot thickens still. The investigation to determine Galileo's position on heliocentrism only began in 1979. It was initiated by Pope John Paul II, and it took 13 years, this investigation, to conclude that they were wrong for imprisoning Galileo and disagreeing with him on heliocentrism. This investigation shouldn't have taken 13 fucking seconds. It shouldn't have taken 13 seconds. But Bishop Barron wants to hold up Galileo because he believed in God in order to demonstrate or prove that there's no conflict between science and religion. Am I wrong here, listener? Am I mistaken, guys? Have I gotten the wrong end of the stick here? Am I missing Bishop Barron's point? Because I'm absolutely flabbergasted by these examples that he's giving. Flabbergasted. I don't even know what to say. I'm at a loss for words. Lest I be accused of biased or dishonest argumentation, or worse still, avoiding challenges to my own position, I think it's important to acknowledge at this juncture, at least for the sake of completeness, that Bishop Barron mentioned not only Descartes and Galileo, but he also, of course, mentioned Gregor Mendel and Newton. Now, I'm not going to discuss these scientists in detail like I have Descartes and Galileo, and I just wanted to clarify my reasoning on that, again, just in case anybody accuses me of being dishonest or avoiding the serious challenges to my own position. The first reason I'm not going to discuss these scientists in detail is basically time. As you have seen thus far, the discussion about Galileo and Descartes has taken up a considerable amount of time, and if I go into Mendel and Newton in detail, this video will end up being 2 or 3 hours long. Aside from that, and I don't mind not acknowledging this and admitting this, but there aren't any serious conflicts between Mendel and Newton, and right there and then there are going to be religious people in the audience who say, haha, there you go, Magic Skeptic, so Bishop Barron is right. And respectfully, I still disagree, and I just wanted to clarify why that is the case before moving on. First of all, guys, just because a scientist lived out their life and didn't have a conflict with the church, that doesn't demonstrate that there isn't a conflict between science and religion. You see, it depends on the specific claims of the scientist involved. For example, Mendel spent much of his time devoted to botany. He is considered the godfather of genetics. And so he was experimenting with plants. He was experimenting with genes and so forth. There's nothing in that that's really going to ruffle the feathers of the Catholic Church at that time. You see, Descartes and others were uttering ideas that were challenging the official doctrine of the church. And of course, the church doesn't like that. When Galileo was talking about heliocentrism, this directly challenged the ideas of the Catholic Church in that the earth was considered to be the center of all things. And so Mendel obviously doesn't ruffle the feathers in the same way that Galileo or Descartes did. And the same is true for Newton. Now, if I'm mistaken here, dear listener, and you're aware of a conflict between those scientists that I'm not, please jump into the comments below and enlighten me. But yeah, there isn't a serious conflict between the latter gentleman that Bishop Barron mentions. But again, this doesn't demonstrate that there's a compatibility between science and religion, because it depends on the specific claims that the scientist is making. If the scientist is making claims that don't have any contact with the beliefs of the Catholic Catechism, well, then there would be no reason to have a conflict between the Catholic Church as an institution and the ideas of these scientists. So that's the first thing. The second thing to address, and I think it's incredibly important here, is that Bishop Barron can name any number of scientists, both contemporarily and historically, that believed in God. But this doesn't demonstrate compatibility between science and religion. The question is it science that led these gentlemen to their belief in God? Was it the scientific method? Was it experimentation? Was it double-blind trials and falsification that led to their belief in God? And the answer to those questions is no. These pillars of the scientific community did not come to their belief in God through the science that they were conducting. You could make a poetic case and say that, yes, they thought that when they were investigating the natural world that they were uncovering the majesty of God. Fine, but that's a presupposition. The question is, did the experiments themselves, did the act of carrying out the science itself confirm their belief in God? And again, the answer to that question is no. If Bishop Barron thinks that merely pointing out scientists, significant or not, who believe in God is evidence of the compatibility between science and religion, that kind of thinking leads in all sorts of terrible directions. I'll just give one example. Newton was an alchemist. Newton believed in the philosopher's stone and that there was a possibility to turn ordinary metals into gold. We understand in today's world that this is just complete woo. Of course, Newton didn't know that, and when Newton was exploring alchemy, he thought he was doing science. So I submit to you, dear listener, does this mean that there is a compatibility between alchemy and science? Well, you know, Newton was a very smart scientist. He is a godfather of science, a pillar of science. So if you're going to suggest that smart scientist believed X, and so therefore there's compatibility between X and science, you're going to have to swallow some pretty significant bitter pills. And if this is the extent of Bishop Barron's argument, well then, I'm afraid to say, dear listener, we can dismiss it right off the bat, because this is a joke of an argument. If you're going to say, Bishop Barron, that we should accept that there's a compatibility between science and religion because intelligent scientists, both presently and in the past, believed and or believe in God, well then you're going to have to accept that alchemy is something that is compatible with science, and a whole host of other ridiculous ideas that scientists in the past who were limited by their time, you're going to have to accept all of those zany beliefs and claims as well. Things like animals not having consciousness, alchemy, and who knows what else. But I'll leave it there for now. Let's move on.
So let's begin with these figures. They're called magoi in the Greek of Matthew's gospel. What does that mean? Well, we don't know exactly. You know, astronomer, astrologer, wise man, etc. Usually we just stay with the magi. Well, here's probably the best guess. In the Chaldean culture of that time, there was a pretty advanced culture of stargazing. And it probably involved, you know, by our standards, a combination of both astronomy and astrology. But wise people, using their analytical reason, would look up into the night sky and they would measure and they'd calculate the movements of the planets and the positions of the stars, etc. Again, in a very scientific spirit, but also something else. They would have recognized in these beautiful intelligibilities a sign of the intelligence who put them into existence. They would have looked at the stars and planets to be sure, and they would have delighted in understanding them more fully, but behind it, they would also have been discerning the will and purpose of the divine.
I'm not entirely sure where he's going here yet, but it already looks pretty bad. I mean, this isn't really distinct from the points that he made about scientists of the past, like Galileo or Descartes and what have you. He's picked out this story about these intelligent, wise people of the past, the stargazers who were doing rudimentary astronomy at the time, although with some astrology mixed in, which is, of course, woo. And he's saying that when these people gazed into the sky and looked at the stars and plotted their trajectories and all the rest of it, that they were also, from their perspective, seeing evidence of God. But I don't care. Why should that matter? Your argument boils down to clever people in the past, intelligent people in the past thought there was a God. Well, intelligent people in the past, as we've discovered, also thought that alchemy was real. Intelligent people in the past also thought that animals weren't conscious. Intelligent people in the past thought all sorts of ridiculous things. Who cares? So what? Well, look, I'm interjecting here. Let's let Bishop Barron finish his point, but I just wanted to interject here and say that it doesn't look like this point is going in a particularly promising or persuasive direction. But let's hear him out.
I think if you had said to these magi, there's a conflict between religion and science, they wouldn't have known what you were talking about. if they'd said, hey, there's a tension between what you're doing, looking up at the night sky, and what people of faith are doing, I think they would have just looked at you with puzzlement.
And if you had looked at Newton and told him that there was a conflict between science and alchemy, he would have looked at you with puzzlement. He would have thought, you were the wrong end of the stick, and that his search for the Philosopher's Stone was a promising scientific endeavor. He would have thought that you were strange. But please go on, Bishop Barron. Do tell us. Tell us about how there's a compatibility between science and religion, because people in the past believed as such. I mean, this is pretty weak. But again, I'm going to hold out hope. Maybe the ace up his sleeve is around the corner. Let's continue.
And so, this beautiful image, and we've got it from 1,000 Christmas cards, but hold that in your mind, of these wise men, astronomers, call them if you want scientists.
No, I won't call them scientists. I'll call them people who were smarter than the average person during the time they lived. If you want to equivocate on the meaning of science as, people who are trying to discover the truth, well then sure, everybody's a scientist. Every Catholic is a scientist. Every Hindu is a scientist. Every Muslim is a scientist. Every religious person on the earth is just looking for the truth as well. It's just that they're not using the tools of science. They're not basing their beliefs on hypotheses that have been continuously falsified through double-blind trials and repetition and experimentation in order to graduate to become theories and acceptable facts and beliefs. No, they're all looking for the truth, but they're doing so in a fallacious and erroneous manner. They're reading ancient textbooks and deciding that they've discovered some penetrating insight into how the world functions. They're looking at the Bible and deciding that it has more in common with a science textbook, and that God really did create the earth in 6 days, or the universe even in 6 days, and rested on the seventh. They're deciding that God created life because it says so in the Bible. They're deciding that it's possible for people to come back from the dead because the narrative of Christ alleges that Christ resurrected after 3 days being dead. Right? These are not scientific processes. You must equivocate, which is to say, blur the lines between the actual definition of science and a scientist. You have to equivocate on those words in order to allege that these people were scientists. They weren't. They weren't scientists. And if you allege that they are, you're just using the word differently, which I'm happy for you to do. But if demonstrating that there's a compatibility between science and religion is as simple as redefining words, well then your video could have been 30 seconds long. I'm just going to define scientists as people who are searching for the truth. Well bloody done, because now you've defined everybody as a scientist. I've never met a person that wasn't interested in what's true or didn't think that they already believed what was true, right? I mean, this is a silly, just weak, nonsensical argument. You don't get to just redefine it and then declare victory and suggest that there's a compatibility between science and religion. If you're going to redefine it and just play a semantic game, own it. Just own it and stop pretending that you've got some deep insight here, because I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
Call them if you want scientists who, on the basis of their scientific investigation, are now journeying to find this newborn King of the Jews. At the end of their journey, they present him with their gifts. They open the coffers of their wisdom and riches before him. In other words, their science didn't lead them away from God and the things of God, but precisely toward God and the things of God.
Or so alleges the story. Because the other elephant in this room is that this is just a story, right? He's talking about the bloody nativity. He's talking about the wise men who follow the star and find Jesus in a manger. This is mythology. Now, I get that a Catholic believes that this story is true, but there's no evidence that this story is true other than the claims of the Bible. And if you want to point to some extra biblical sources of people mentioning the birth of Jesus or something like that, again, these are all just words. I don't care how many people agree something happened. We don't decide that something has happened because people agree, right? I mean, I know you might say, oh, but you're just being unfair historically. This is how we discover that historical events are true. And look, fine. If you want to go down the historian road and say that I believe that Jesus Christ really existed, and I don't really necessarily deny it. I don't deny, I'm not a mythicist. I don't believe that Jesus's life is all just a myth. There might very well have been a guy called Jesus Christ wandering around the desert 2,000 years ago. I'm fine with that. But that's not all Bishop Barron is saying here. He's not just saying that a guy called Jesus was alive. He's saying that by gazing into the night sky, that 3 wise men, scientists, were guided towards God. That is an extra claim. And I don't buy that. I don't believe that the night sky and that a star led 3 wise men to a manger where the child of God was just birthed from a virgin. I don't believe that. I'm sorry. That's nonsense. You've gone beyond mere historical reference there. I'm happy to acknowledge that Jesus existed because there are biblical and extra-biblical sources attesting to that fact. What I'm not happy to grant you, Bishop Barron, is that 3 wise men, or what you called scientists, were guided by a star to a virgin birth site. That's what I'm not granting you here. This is not evidence of the compatibility between science and religion. This is a story. This is a myth that you have taken hook, line, and sinker. Again, just to distinguish between 2 things. I'm happy to accept that Jesus is real, a real historical figure, right? I'm happy to accept that. But that's not all you're claiming here. You're claiming that people were guided by a sign in the sky towards a virgin birth site where God had been born. You don't get to claim that just because the historical evidence of Jesus actually having existed is good. I mean, the historical evidence of New York existing is quite good, but it doesn't mean Spider-Man is real. Right? Just because there are some facts in your narrative, that doesn't lend credence to the more zany, bombastic, supernatural claims of your story. Jesus could in fact have existed, and I happen to believe that he did. But that doesn't mean that he was born of a virgin, and it doesn't mean that 3 scientists were guided by a star in the night sky to a virgin birth site. You're going to need to provide a bit more evidence for that to be taken seriously, Bishop. I'm sorry. And again, we're no closer here to demonstrating that there is no conflict between science and religion. This is a joke.
Well, see, we Christians understand why this is true, and I'm going to rely here on the great work of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict.
You mean the Pope who resigned, and the Pope who resigned under suspicious circumstances, the Pope who reigned during some of the more troubling discoveries of the Catholic Church's, shall we say, antics vis-a-vis young children. The kind of antics that led to priests being relocated to other parishes in order to escape and abscond justice. You mean that Pope? Yeah, let's dive into his insights on this question. I'm sure he's a reliable thinker.
Pope Benedict said it's very, very important that in the Gospel of John, Jesus is referred to as the Logos. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God.
What?
And through that Logos, all things came to be. I'm keeping it on purpose there in the original Greek because I want to give this richer sense of what that word means. We say word, and fair enough translation. But think of it as the logic, the mind, the pattern, the intelligent pattern that was present to God from the beginning, and again, given God's simplicity, was God from the beginning. God is this primal patterning intelligence.
Assertion, assertion, assertion.
So nothing came to be unless it was touched somehow by the Logos. The world is not dumbly there for Christians, just there in a sort of chaotic, random manner. No.
Straw man. Show me the person who believes that it's just a random, chaotic mess. Who believes that? That's not what I believe. I think it's quite clear. The laws of physics create order. The laws of physics, we understand how planets form. We understand how things can come to rest, that chaotic, events can become orderly. If I take a whole bunch of marbles and I toss them onto the floor, they'll be chaotically bouncing around the place, and because of the laws of physics, they will eventually come to rest and be in a more ordered state. There's no intelligence involved there. They just become ordered by virtue of the laws of physics. And yeah, I don't see order necessarily as evidence of divine agency, or any kind of agency for that matter. We know how complexity can emerge unguided by a mind. My favorite example is the snowflake, which crystallizes in the air, again, purely according to the laws of physics. If you look at a snowflake, it is this remarkably ordered, complex, and textured pattern that you would swear was created by an artist. And yet we know that a snowflake forms according to the kind of blind, deterministic laws of physics. Now, here's, of course, where a Christian steps in and says, oh, but God designed the laws of physics. Prove it. Don't make an assertion. Prove it. And I'm sorry, but if someone had genuinely proven that the laws of physics come from a divine agent, that person would have won the Nobel Prize for science. So if you can prove it, your Nobel Prize is waiting. Off you go.
In the beginning was intelligent speech, and through that intelligent speech, all things came to be.
This is actually just unbelievable. The modus operandi, like the intent of this video, as the title goes, he's trying to demonstrate that science is not opposed to faith. And in the very video where he's trying to demonstrate that there isn't any conflict between science and religion, he's just gone off on a huge rant about the logos, or the logic of God, the intelligent patterning agent that resides behind all things. Assertion, 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 claim, 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 claim. No evidence, no nothing, assertion, assertion, assertion. Are you kidding me? At what point do you think that this is an acceptable argument to use in a video where you're attempting to demonstrate the compatibility between science and religion? Scientists don't go around making assertions. Scientists didn't assert that the Big Bang happened. Darwin didn't assert that evolution happened. People don't, in the scientific domain, don't assert facts. They demonstrate them. Please provide a demonstration, Bishop Barron, or desist with your fallacious and erroneous claim that science and religion are compatible.
What do scientists look for? And I mean every scientist up and down the ages, from the ancient philosophers and researchers up through the modern scientists. They're all looking in some way for logos. They're looking for some patterned intelligibility in things.
So because he's taken this religious term, the logos, and interpreted it as logic, reason, and patterns, he's now going to attempt to argue that scientists are really in search of a religious goal because they're looking for patterns, they're looking for evidence, they're looking for reasons. This is just ridiculous. This is just so dumb. I'm sorry. Again, I'm not defining his entire character here as dumb, but equivocating on the fact that scientists search for patterns and evidence and reason, and calling those things religious goals, that this doesn't demonstrate that there's a compatibility between science and religion. All it demonstrates is that you're rather creative with words. But that doesn't surprise me, because there's plentiful evidence in this video that you are willing to engage in semantics. And this is just another semantic argument. You're defining the scientific endeavor as a religious one and then declaring victory. Ha! See, I told you, science and religion are compatible. Scientists aren't looking for the logos. They're not looking for patterns put there by God. They're just investigating the reality in which we live and forming conclusions based on hypotheses that become and graduate to become theories through a process of falsification. That's what they're doing. If you're going to call that religious, have at it. But that's not what religions are doing. That is not how anybody arrived at the conclusion of a virgin birth. That's not how anybody arrived at the conclusion of Jesus returning from the dead. Show me the experiment. Show me the hypothesis that was falsified. Show me the double-blind trials, right? Show me the experiments that demonstrated the resurrection of Christ or the virgin birth. No. Instead, what you have for me are stories from an ancient book. You have stories buttressed with assertions. This is not science, and that's not what scientists do. Scientists get in the lab, they get into the field, they do hard work. They measure, they quantify, they experiment, they falsify. And more often than not, their hypotheses are proven to be incorrect and they go back to the drawing board. Christianity doesn't update its point of view, at least rarely, right? Through the bullying of modernity and the Enlightenment and our increases in scientific knowledge, the best you'll get out of religious people is, oh, okay, so I believe in evolution now, but just God caused it, right? Oh, okay, I believe in the Big Bang now, but God did it, right? That's the best you get, right? And unfortunately, not all religious adherents abide by that best standard. Some of them just reject evolution. They reject the Big Bang. They reject anything that contradicts their presuppositions, their religious presuppositions. So the best you get are the religious people who say, oh yeah, brilliant. So we just have discovered how God created life, or rather caused life to evolve. We've just discovered how God created the universe because God did it, right? Again, this is not scientific. This is not scientific, guys. What scientists do and what the Magi did is different. They're not the same thing. And equivocating on the meanings of the words and going down this road of interpreting the Logos as searching for divine patterns in the sky and all this kind of stuff, none of it gets you to the point where you're going to get me to believe that modern day science is a religious endeavor. That is bull.
Just think for a second, the way we name the sciences. Psychology, logos, the logos about the psyche, about the psyche. Physiology, the logos about the body. All the sciences have that suffix, practically all of them, of logos. Because they have to do with objective intelligibility. Where's that come from? The world's not just dumbly there, that's very clear. And so just by a wild cosmic accident, every nook and cranny of the physical world is marked by patterned intelligibility. Does that strike you as a reasonable position? On the contrary.
No, it doesn't strike me as a reasonable position, but it's not a position that I'm aware of anybody holding. I'm not aware of any scientists who think that the intelligibility of the universe is just an accident, that it's just a wildly chaotic mess that happened to form in an ordered state. They don't think it's random. Nobody I've ever heard alleges that the intelligibility of the universe is best explained by randomness. And by the way, and I'm sorry to say it, Bishop Barron, but it is possible for randomness to produce order. It is entirely possible. I grant you that it's unlikely, but unlikely doesn't mean impossible. If I threw a whole bunch of marbles up into the air and they landed on the floor and they happened to spell out my name, that's an unlikely outcome. I grant you that. But it's not an impossible outcome, right? But, I'll go with you on this intuitional road for a moment and just agree with you for the sake of argument that the universe's current ordered state is unlikely to be the outcome of randomness. But, again, at what point does the order become evidence of your designer? Because that's what you're suggesting here. This is essentially a design argument. You're appealing to the complexity of the universe and suggesting that that complexity is best explained by a designer. But you don't know that. You haven't performed a scientific experiment or study in order to demonstrate that. You're just making an assertion. What you're saying is really, it's an argument from ignorance. You're saying, I can't think of a better explanation for the complexity and the intelligibility of the universe, therefore God. That's an argument from ignorance fallacy, which is to say somebody just asserts that their presupposition is correct because they can't think of a better explanation. But your inability to think of an explanation or to discover an explanation None of that is evidence for your presupposition. I'm sorry. That's not how this works. That is fallacious reasoning, Bishop. And again, in a video where you're trying to suggest that science and religion are compatible, it's pretty rich that you're stooping to such fallacious lows. You don't get to assert that design is evidence, or that apparent design or complexity is evidence for a designer or a divine mind. That's not how that works. For all we know, when universes form, they have no choice but to form in the way that we currently see this one. Maybe it's completely determined. Maybe universes always look exactly like this when they form. You see, the problem is, Bishop, we only have one universe available for us to explore, and we haven't even explored 1% of 1% of 1% of it. And I dare say we probably don't even understand 1% of 1% of 1% of it. We have a sample size of one universe. So you can't make any probabilistic claims about how likely or unlikely it is that it's been designed. You can't do that because you have a sample size of one. You can't form any probability or conclusion about complexity and how it's intelligible based on a sample size of one universe. If we had a meta perspective and it turned out there was a multiverse and we could examine thousands or hundreds of universes, we might discover that perhaps they're all identical. Or maybe it's true that they are all random and we just happen to find ourselves in the one universe, in the multiverse, that was ordered in such a way that allowed us to emerge. The truth, though, is I don't know. And your appeals to an ancient text and equivocating on the meaning of science and throwing the word logos in and around the place every now and then, none of that gets us any closer to determining that this universe is in fact best explained by a patterning intelligence, as you put it. The fact that things are intelligible and follow a certain pattern is not necessarily evidence for a mind. And so your appeal to the patterned intelligibility of the universe as being evidence for a divine creator or mind, it's just an assertion. And it's an assertion that's not going to persuade me or any other like-minded individual.
This very objective intelligibility, which is the ground for all science, leads one to acknowledge, it seems to me, the existence of this logos, which has spoken all things into being. Now, go back to the Magi.
No, let's not go back to the Magi just yet, Bishop Barron, because the other problem here is that this alleged intelligibility, this order that you claim has been put there by a divine mind, look how bad the order actually is. I mean, are you kidding me? We live in a universe where there appears to be life in one little pocket. Now, perhaps it's in other places too, and it's not yet discovered, but look at all the ways in which it's not very well ordered. We know, for example, that our sun is going to burn out, and when it does, life on this planet will extinguish. Right? Look at this very planet. Plate tectonics, plates that bump into one another causing, massive tsunamis and earthquakes. Doesn't seem very orderly to me. Human biology that's plagued with cancers and, appendicitis, where your appendix can randomly swell up and kill you, right? And just look at the example of the human throat, the esophagus, this tube that we use both for swallowing food and breathing. An intelligent, orderly design that results in thousands of people year in and year out choking to death. Quite an intelligently ordered universe. Yeah. Anyway, back we go to the Magi, or scientists. Please continue, Bishop Barron. Tell us more, O wise one.
Now, go back to the Magi. Good scientists looking up into the night sky, looking at the patterned intelligibilities in the stars and the planets. Where did it lead them? To a gross materialism? That's all there is, just matter in motion. How many people today say that?
Ow, my feelings. Gross materialism. Oh, goodness gracious me. Now look, I don't identify necessarily as a materialist, because a materialist, definitionally speaking, is someone who believes that all that exists is the material world. I'm not confident enough to make the claim that all that exists is the material world. You might call me a methodological materialist or a methodological naturalist. All I believe is what I can see thus far, which is I've never seen any evidence of any supernatural realm. I've never seen any evidence of anything, beyond the material world. And so for now, I believe tentatively that the material world exists, and I'm open to other possibilities. I'm not going to say with certainty that those other possibilities don't exist. I think that would be rather unscientific. I believe in what can be demonstrated, and thus far, all that has ever been demonstrated to exist is the material world. As soon as somebody demonstrates that there's an immaterial world, I'll believe it. But it's nice to know that Bishop Barron thinks that such a belief is a gross one. Anyway, let's keep going.
They were quite right in intuiting that these pattern intelligibilities lead them to the great intelligent logos that has brought all things into being. And so beautifully they go in search of this word made flesh. What had they heard about in these ancient prophecies? That word, that logos, the creator God, was becoming a king in the form of this little baby. Science led to faith. It was not repugnant to faith.
And there we see the absolutely unbelievable crescendo. The claim, science led to faith. But how many equivocations, how many fallacies, how many assertions did it require for Bishop Barron to get to that conclusion, that science led to faith? He asserts that primitive stargazers, who might very well have been very wise for their time, but people who were unbelievably biased, who did not perform any experiments, people who were simply following a religious ethic. And, the elephant in the room, this is just a story, by the way. But in this ancient narrative of these three wise men that he equivocates and calls scientists, they went on a journey and found the virgin birth site of the baby Jesus. So because a mythological narrative told us that three wise people who he asserts as scientists found the virgin birth site of the Son of God, because that all happened in a storybook, therefore science leads to God. Combining that with assertions about design and the traditional design argument and the erroneous assumption that complexity equals a mind, all those, classically flawed religious apologetics, you throw all that in a blender and you get therefore science leads to God. I'll leave it to your judgment, dear listener, but all I can say is I'm not convinced.
The Catholic faith at its best has never stood opposed to reason. No, it loves and embraces the sciences, loves and embraces philosophy, loves and embraces all expressions of rationality.
What a qualifier that is. The Catholic faith at its best. By adding that qualifier, he walls off in parentheses, separating them from the conversation, all of the examples where the Catholic Church stood in opposition to scientific progress. He excludes, just with a flick of his hand, right, just with a quick bit of verbiage, at its best, he excludes the examples of Galileo. He excludes the Index of Prohibited Books. He excludes all of the times that the Catholic Church stood in opposition to science and reason. And you don't even need to look at the history books for that when you look at how the Catholic Church behaves in today's world, where Catholic missionaries still preach in Africa the sinfulness of contraception use. In a place in the world where people are ravaged with AIDS and where reducing birth rates would be a net good because these people are suffering in unbelievable poverty, depending on which part of Africa you want to focus on. But no, the Catholic Church preaches the sinfulness of condom usage and the pill. The Catholic Church is a despicable organization. It stands in opposition to science. But because Bishop Barron says the Catholic faith at its best, what is he referring to? What is he actually talking about there? Because that little quip, at its best, again, my reading here is that he's walling off and removing all of the examples that demonstrate the falsehood of his conclusion here. Don't you dare suggest that the Catholic Church is a champion of science, reason, and philosophy. It has stood in opposition to the ideals of those disciplines for centuries, and it continues to do so to this very day. And to be quite honest, it is utterly bewildering and baffling to me that somebody could think the opposite.
Where did I first study the great novelists and the poets, those who explore the objective intelligibilities within human experience, within the human mind? I learned all that in Catholic schools.
I don't think I need to explain how ridiculous this point of view is. So because he learned about some science in Catholic schools, therefore there's no conflict between Catholicism and science? What? Are you kidding me? That's really, really dumb. I mean, let me give you an analogy, right? Kids went to Nazi schools in Nazi Germany in the 30s and the 40s. I'm pretty sure they learned some good math. I'm pretty sure they learned some scientific facts. Now, they also learned some pretty bogus ones about crony claims about Jewish biology being different and a different skeletal structure and a smaller brain and all of that ridiculous Nazi nonsense. But I can make the same claim. You know, a Nazi sympathizer could come along and say, where did I learn about science? Where did I learn my mathematics? Where did I learn how to do poetry? See, there's no conflict between Nazism and reason. There's no conflict between Nazism and mathematics. So therefore, Nazism is logical, just like mathematics is. Therefore, Nazism is analytic, just like mathematics is. Give me a break. Give me a break. I'm from Catholic Ireland. I was raised in these Catholic schools. I know what gets said in those classrooms. I know how unscientific it all is. I know how biased it is. I know about that indoctrination. I know how kids were made feel small for daring to question the resurrection, and how kids got in trouble for simply bringing up the theory of evolution. I had friends, Bishop Barron. I had friends who were sent out of their classrooms because they dared to challenge the religious orthodoxy in which we were being raised. And you want to sit there smugly and tell me that materialism is gross? You want to sit there smugly and suggest that there's no conflict between science and religion? Well, tell that to Catholic Ireland, Bishop Barron. Tell it to the people who are in American schools where they're trying to have creationism taught alongside science because of the arguments that people like you are deploying about the patterned intelligibility of the universe. Give me a break. You want to stand up for rational religion and propose this obscene idea that Catholicism and science are one and the same. And to do it, you must assert and equivocate and engage in fallacy after fallacy after fallacy. Give me a break, because I lived it, Bishop Barron. And no, this isn't an anecdotal argument. I'm not saying because I experienced it, therefore it's true. Read the studies. Look at the human rights violations that various human rights watchdog bodies around the world have noticed in Catholic schools. This is a fact. And for you to equivocate and assert and engage in fallacy after fallacy in order to erect the opposite and fallacious and erroneous idea that there's some kind of a compatibility between science and religion, it is absolutely sickening, Bishop. And I've had it. Apologies, dear listener. Apologies, but I'm angry. I thought I could keep my cool for this video, but this absolutely sickens me. I feel violently ill listening to this. This is just sophistry. This is sophistry of the most grotesque form. And I've had it. I've had enough. I've had enough.
2 hours later.
You know, very early on in the tradition, there was a fellow named Tertullian, church father, great figure in many ways. But Tertullian said something, and he expressed an attitude that the church found repugnant. Tertullian said, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem?" And what he meant was, what do the speculations of the philosophers of Athens have to do with the revelation given to the Jews? Well, the church repudiated that. The church at its best from the earliest days. Think of Paul himself all the way through Thomas Aquinas and up to the present day. The church at its best had said, no, Athens and Jerusalem belong together. The questing mind of Athens should not be put to rest. No, on the contrary.
Unless, that scientific inquiring mind dares to suggest that the sun is at the center of our solar system. Unless that scientific inquiring mind suggests that contraception would be a good solution to the problems in Africa in 2022. Unless those things happen, along with a slew of others. So yeah, you can cherry pick church history. You can cherry pick Christian history to find examples of where great church fathers suggested that there's some kind of equanimity that exists between science and religion. But to the extent that you're doing that, it is just as a consequence of cherry picking.
The questing mind of Athens should not be put to rest. No, on the contrary. Allow all of that rich intellectual energy to express itself as fully as possible because it's always seeking some form of logos and therefore ultimately is seeking the source of that objective intelligibility.
A source that you have failed to demonstrate and used a completely ridiculous and fallacious argument to try and prove. Your mere acknowledgement that there are patterns in nature and in reality and in the universe more broadly. Right, okay. But that's not evidence of this God that you're alleging exists. Sorry. Maybe I should rephrase. It's certainly not good evidence, right? And so again, we come back to yet again, another assertion that God is the source. Try again.
I'll close with this. These twin groups, you might say, around a Christmas. The shepherds. Well, shepherds were very ordinary people. In fact, shepherds were kind of seen as lowlifes. Their testimony wouldn't have been accepted in court. They weren't taken seriously. The angel appeared, though, to the shepherds. Good. The simplest people come to Christ.
I'm going to resist the temptation to make a joke about the simplest people coming to Christ, but I think you know what I might be referring to.
Faith needs science to keep it from becoming superstitious. There's a danger of that. If you just block out reason, then faith can become superstitious.
You mean superstitions like the idea that a Jew who was nailed to a piece of 2x4 came back from the dead 3 days later? You mean the kind of superstition that involves believing that bread and wine literally turn into the body and blood of a 2,000-year-old dead Jew? You mean those kinds of superstitions? Yeah, science is required in order to refute those and to prevent people from believing silly, irrational things. But, please continue, Bishop.
But the sciences need faith, so they don't become self-contained and self-referential. Faith and reason. And a great place to look to find this coming together is in the journey of the Magi. And God bless you.
No, they don't. Scientists don't need faith, and this idea that without it they'll become too self-referential. I'm not even so sure what you mean there, Bishop Barron, but science has been doing quite well without faith for quite some time now. When we base our worldview on science, planes fly, TVs turn on, iPhones and Android phones get built, medicines get discovered, and diseases are cured, and all the rest of it, right? The world is an amazing place, and it's made even more amazing because of the discovery of things like antibiotics and technology. And all of these things are made possible by science without any need for faith, without any need for recourse back to a 2,000-year-old holy book. Well, it's not 2,000 years, but the stories in it at least are at least 2,000 years old at minimum. Unless you want to go back into Judaism, in which case it's older. But no, with the greatest of respect, although I probably haven't been respectful at every point here in this video, and if I have come across as more disrespectful than usual, dear listener, you must forgive me, but some of the claims that were made by Bishop Barron in his video were particularly unpleasant for me to have to listen to. But just before we part ways, I want to share one final anecdote with you, and it is the story of Agent Mulder and Scully. You know, the truth is out there. They're searching for the supernatural. They're searching for, well, the natural perhaps, but they're searching for aliens in the night sky. You know, it's a story where two characters are searching for the truth because the truth is out there. So does that mean that there's a compatibility between those who believe in aliens and science? Because these two characters in this mythological narrative are searching for the truth and they happen to stumble across alien life forms? Well, if we use Bishop Barron's logic, I guess we are forced to come to that conclusion, because I found a mythological narrative that has penetrated the zeitgeist and the culture extremely popular, right? And these two characters are searching for the truth. They are scientists of a sort, because they're searching for the truth. And they find it. They find aliens. They find extraterrestrial life. Therefore, there's no conflict between those who believe they were abducted by aliens and science. In fact, there is a scientific endeavor at play in those who believe it, right? So again, guys, you can see how silly it is, in my view at least, to appeal to a mythological narrative where people are, quote-unquote, searching for the truth, and then they find God. Well, I see no difference between that and the example of Agent Mulder and Scully in, of course, the X-Files. For any of you who are big fans of that show, I salute you. In any case, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, drop a like on it. I just want to say thank you to all of my supporters who tune in every week and watch my content. I'm enormously humbled by your support and your interest and the fact that you drop likes on the videos and jump into the comments below. But I want to give an extra special thank you to my patrons. And if you weren't aware, my Patreon account has launched, and you can gain access to all sorts of perks and bonuses, like getting your question answered in a video, or sitting down with me for a Skype call, or getting your name in the credits and so on. All sorts of perks and bonuses available to my patrons. And so to those of you who have already signed up, I'm eternally grateful. Thank you very much. And to all of you, I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.